Hello and welcome to the Educators Going Global podcast. In this episode, we interview frequent guest Jacqueline Mallais. We offered Jacqueline's full biography in an earlier episode, so the main thing to know here is that Jacqueline is a consultant ready and willing to help educators, those new to international education, and veterans with their job recruiting efforts. Once again, we were totally amazed by all the helpful insights that Jacqueline shared with us. We discussed recruiting fairs, contacting schools directly, prepping for interviews, knowing what to look for in packages, and lots more. You will not want to miss out on all this terrific information. We recorded this episode on September 28th, 2022. And now, here's Jacqueline.
Good morning, Jacqueline. How are things with you? What have you been up to lately?
Good morning, Audrey. Good morning, David. Everything's great here in Guadalajara, Mexico. I'm enjoying some beautiful weather in the morning, about 22, 23 degrees Celsius. It gets up to about 26 in the afternoon. And I've been working on getting my residence permit, my own temporary residence. And I'm happy to say I was accepted under my own financial capabilities to sponsor myself and just need to get the plastic card printed. So it's pretty exciting.
Hooray! I just think it's fantastic that you're mentioning that because not everybody would know that you can go to a country and not have a job in that country and apply for residency. So that's really good to know, particularly for our soon-to-be retirees in the audience.
Yeah,
So
and
thank you
anyone
for
that's
that.
working online, the digital nomads in Mexico are all over the place, all over Mexico, because it's such a low cost of living. And you would just need to prove 12 months of the ability to sponsor yourself, to pay for yourself, and then have a working level of Spanish. I did not have to hire a lawyer, and I was able to fumble through with my, I would say, beginner/intermediate level of Spanish to get all the paperwork done at immigration. Thank
Congratulations.
you. Yes.
Great. So we talked a bit earlier. You said that you have another going global story to share with us that has to do with black olives and feta cheese. I'm
Ah,
intrigued to hear this story.
that's right. So in 1996, when I first headed overseas, I applied to three countries: Japan, Korea, South Korea, and Taiwan. And I got some, postcards back. That was back in the day before really email was out there. So postcards and letters back from the different schools. And one day I got hired in South Korea, and I knew from one day to the next that I was leaving for Korea. I had no idea anything about Korea. I got there and I found out I could not eat anything because I don't have a spice tolerance, or at that time I didn't. And everything that was red was not tomatoes, it was chili pepper. And so I decided the next time I go overseas, I'm going to fix that. So the next time was 2002. I was headed to Istanbul. I knew 6 months in advance, and I didn't like black olives or feta cheese. And I thought, you know what? I'm not making the same mistake twice. I'm going to change my palate. So for 6 months, I started slowly adding these things into my salad. And before you knew it, I could eat black olives and feta cheese. And I had a great arrival in Turkey because they eat those quite often, and I had no problem. So my advice to your listeners is to find out sort of the cuisine, the local cuisine, and try and adapt your taste buds ahead of time to make your assimilation or your integration into that particular cuisine a lot easier.
Well, that's good for you.
Yeah, that is so cool. Who would have thought? And the whole idea of coming back to folks going overseas, that growth mindset, ready to adapt, ready to go into your stretch zone. And who would have thought about the food arena? But yeah, you're spot on with that.
Well, because oftentimes it will be a bit of a culture shock. It's one of those moments where you're Are you going to be going like me in 1996, going to McDonald's and Burger King because you can't eat the local food? And by the end of the year, then I was able to adapt to the spice. Or are you going to be, diving right in and knowing that you can go to any restaurant and eat something off the menu because you've adapted your taste buds to the new cuisine?
Super cool. So let's jump in. We're going to throw another big question at you. Our guiding question for this episode is, so you've completed your preparation, getting ready to recruit. What happens next? So you've done your basic documentation. What are the next steps to really dive into the recruiting process?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head. Recruiting agencies are the way to go, I think. There's a number of ways you can find a job overseas. One of them is word of mouth. So getting the word out there to your network, if you're already overseas and you have a significant network, say on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, you get the word out saying, hey, guys, I'm looking for next year. So, you do this around this time of year, actually, September, October. You start telling people, I'm looking for a new position. If you happen to hear of blank, a middle school music teacher or a high school math teacher position, I'd be interested. So you do word of mouth. The second option is to directly look at websites. The school websites often have their openings, let's say, October, November, December, January. That's when they start to post their openings. But some schools' websites aren't really up to date. And so that could be, a hit in the dark, or trying to target your applications to just a few schools could be really difficult. So most people go with the recruiting agency. And there's any number of recruiting agencies out there, going from paid, quite expensive. Let's say, I think the most right now is about $250 for a 3-year contract with one recruiting agency, all the way down to free. And there's quite a few recruiting agencies that are free. And I believe the reason they're free is because they get their money back from the schools. If you are hired through their agency, the school will pay basically for that privilege of having interviewed you and gotten you through their recruiting agency.
So that is the perfect note to segue on into our next question. Maybe you can just give a teeny bit of an idea of what a recruiting fair is for people. And then is there one you'd recommend over others? So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So first, maybe just for some of your listeners that are absolute newbies at this, a recruiting fair is, so there, as you've pointed out, there's now 2 different kinds of recruiting fairs, where we have in person and we had virtual during the pandemic. And some are still keeping their virtual job fairs this year. So I'll speak to the one that is kind of what's normal and what has normally been out there for years and years, is the in-person recruiting fair. It's where they host at a hotel in a large ballroom. They host any number of schools. It could be up to like 50, 60, 70 schools could be represented there around the ballroom at tables with their documents and brochures and posters and job openings posted around their table. And you're given a map. You're told, okay, this is where you'll find all the different schools. You need to sign up for these. They fill up quite quickly. And as candidates, I think they try and keep the number, please don't quote me on this, but maybe, something like 10 to 1, 10 candidates to one school. So if you have 50 schools, then you're going to have 500 candidates or something at this particular job fair. You go around, you ask for interviews, you show your CV. All of this is also electronically on your profile with the particular recruiting agency. And then the rest of the weekend, and typically it's a 2 or 3 day event, the rest of the weekend, you're filling your time with interviews and with presentations. So these presentations are incredible. You get a chance to hear about all the different schools. I would always recommend going to as many as you can, because even if at that time they don't have an opening for you, down the road, it might be something that you want to consider going to a particular school or a particular country. And they give you a lot of information about what it's like to live in a certain country during their presentations. So that's the in-person job fair, and I would recommend it. I know a lot of people find it a little bit like a meat market. where you feel like you're just a walking, talking piece of meat that they want to hire. I mean, it's awful to say, but sometimes, it can come off that way. But I've been lucky that I've made some really great connections, just even in the elevators or at the wine and cheese at the beginning. You're walking around, you see people's name tags, where they're from now, where they're working, and I have a friend that works there now, and you make connections that way. And then the virtual job fairs have been interesting. I've attended a couple of them over the years of the pandemic when they switched to online. It's a lot of waiting at your computer, waiting for the heads of schools and the HR departments to see a note. You've written them a message saying you would like to have an interview with them, and then just waiting for that reply. They have tried to automate it quite a bit where you can apply for any number of positions instead of just one by one by one, but it's still a long waiting game. And the feedback I've gotten from friends and my network is that it was a waste of their time. And so I don't know if I would, at this juncture this year, I know everyone is dying to go back to the in-person rather than the virtual fair. I would say try both, because virtual fair is free in a sense. If that's your one and only fair that you can go to, then it will be free with certain recruiting agencies. And then if you have the opportunity to go to a second one that's in person, you might have, down the road, let's say December, January are very popular months. January, more so, January, February, actually, for the in-person job fairs. It's always a little bit of a crapshoot to see what is the right timing. I've been to job fairs in October, in November, in December, in January, and there's always positions at every one of them. But when is the ideal time? It's really tough to say. And I don't know for this market this year what it's going to be like. I have heard that schools are asking for their employees, their staff members, to give them their letters of intent, which is basically, are you re-signing with us or not? Are you leaving or are you staying? They're asking for that way earlier than usual, like October, November this year.
It's almost like a competition among the schools to, who can ask earlier. And I was even at a school where they offered a resigning bonus if you 100% committed to resigning before, I think it might have been October 1st, because they wanted to get the jump on all the best candidates. So they wanted to know, to be able to confirm what positions were going to be available as early as they possibly could. So to them, it was worth it to offer that. And it was sweet for me because I was planning to resign anyhow. So it just gave me the opportunity to make some money.
Yes, I've heard of the resigning and the re-signing bonuses.
Yeah.
So resigning, where if you give them lots of lead time that you're leaving, then they give you a little bit of a bonus on your next paycheck. Re-signing bonuses of 1 to 2 to 3 year contracts and incrementally growing depending on the school. So if a re-signing bonus for 1 year is, let's say, $500, I'm just throwing a number out there, it's not necessarily that, but then the re-signing of 3 years could be 2,000, so that it's not actually 3 times the 500, it's a little bit more to really entice you into staying longer. And if schools do that, it's often the case that they want that stability. They want you, and maybe perhaps you're a family. So you're a double candidate family with 2 working teachers, a couple of students, and they want that guarantee that this family will stay around for 3 years.
Yeah, I think it's also about, I think it's important to acknowledge that it is really tricky for schools to try to get just the right match for all the positions that they have. And so they want to get that nailed down, get that figured out as early as they can so that they have the maximum potential for hiring all the people they need to hire and, not having it like June and we haven't hired for, for August kind of thing. So it's all of those things combined.
Yeah, it's truly a puzzle piece, and it boggles the mind to think they need to juggle all the different, not only the different positions, the different subjects they offer, but also the different sections. So, they need a kindergarten teacher and they need a high school math teacher. And what often heads of school will start doing is looking for those specialist positions, those ones that are really difficult to find, and try and cover those first. And as unfortunate as it is, a lot of times kindergarten, primary teachers are the last ones to get hired simply because they don't have that specialty like AP economics or, IBDP music teacher, that they need to have certain credentials to be able to teach those subjects. And an elementary teacher that teaches grade 2 is not necessarily a specialist teacher. So they're often either trailing spouses, the specialist has a partner who doesn't have a specialty, then there'll be a teaching couple that they hire, and they're keeping those primary positions open for that purpose.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
So that's a pretty clear pathway to go through the recruiting fairs. It does seem like there's a second pathway of contacting schools directly. So what's your advice for newbies and veterans in reaching out to schools directly? What can you offer these folks?
Yeah, I can't honestly say if I've ever had much luck directly contacting through email a head of school or an HR department, simply because we've got to keep in mind that for any position, they might get 1,000 applicants. And you can imagine if 1,000 are applying through the right, correct way, be that a recruiting agency or directly through their website. And speaking to that, the website might have a whole application process that you would need to fill out. And that's just to standardize their applicants so that they can compare apples to apples. So keep in mind, they might get 1,000 responses the correct way. Now, then they might get double that in sort of unsolicited emails directly to the head of school or directly to the HR director. And I just don't think it's going to be very realistic to expect a personal response in every case. So it really comes down to what kind of candidate are you? Are you a specialist? Are you a specialized teacher that has a niche? Do you have a lot of experience with different schools with different curricula? So, are you an expert in your field? Do you dabble a little bit in everything and then you can kind of fit the puzzle piece? So these sort of things will help you if you are directly emailing the head of school or the HR department. But I can't say one way or the other if that's going to come to fruition. I think your best chances are doing everything, doing a little bit of everything, tackling your network, trying that targeted to specific schools that you're really keen on, and then joining a recruiting or several recruiting agencies. I've always been of the mind that, am I really going to lose an opportunity because I couldn't pay $25 or $30 to this particular recruiting agency? I've always been of the mind that, what's $30? So I've joined all of them, and then the free ones, the paid ones. And I've been able to actually see that, yeah, a lot of schools actually cross post, they post their jobs on several recruiting agencies. And for that reason, I'm able to help my clients with, you could probably just do this particular recruiting agency because they cover most of them.
Just wondering if you would differentiate between newbies and veterans for any of these suggestions, or whether it's really you're making these recommendations for both.
Yeah, I think newbies are definitely going to want to go with the recruiting agencies simply because they're fish out of water. So they'll need that extra help, they'll need that extra guidance, and recruiting agencies are set up for them for that reason. Veterans, and depending on how much experience, and as I say, if they are an expert in their field, they could actually forego the whole recruiting agency, the virtual fairs, and so on, and rely simply on network and direct contact with schools. But they would need to do that really early on. Being a veteran teacher, they would know that they shouldn't wait until January to start contacting schools. So, immediately in October, having their curriculum vitae, their resume, some people call it CV, some people call it resume, but having that ready to go, having their cover letter ready to go, and then targeting their particular schools they want to work at really early on could do it. They wouldn't necessarily need to go that recruitment and virtual fair or in-person fair route at all.
Yeah, that's been my experience in a couple of situations where my husband and I were able to directly contact schools, partly because we had the connections and knew people, either knew the head of school or knew some other people at the school that we could, reference and say, we've got some information about your school, and then those people would serve as references for us. So once you're a veteran, you certainly have a leg up in
Yeah,
that
and
sense.
oftentimes heads of schools will contact their staff members and say, okay, these are our openings. Do you have anybody that you would recommend for these positions? And kind of keep it not in-house, but keep that personal connection, because the teachers know best who would fit their school culture as well.
Hmm. Hmm. So let's imagine then that we're at the point where we are getting close to having an interview. Do you have tips for interview prep, for during interviews, perhaps any particular suggestions for singles versus couples? And then do you recommend interview follow up? So it's a multi part question, but I'll let you go for it.
Okay, well, for interview prep, there's any number of websites out there with sample questions that I would definitely recommend getting a spreadsheet, opening up, a Google Doc or a OneDrive doc, copying and pasting those questions and actually writing out your answers. Just the fact that you've worked ahead the answer will help you prepare. And then the best part is when you're about to step into that interview room, whether it be virtual or in person, you can read through your document and kind of refresh yourself on your answers. And that way you're more prepared and you actually feel more confident walking into the interview situation. The other thing that I recommend is also mock interviews, so if you have someone in your network, someone on your staff, like your colleagues that could play the role of the interviewer, this, going through a mock interview beforehand will also get you that practice so that your answers flow better and not necessarily sound rehearsed. You don't want a canned or rehearsed answer that you've memorized verbatim, but just so that you're conscious of the gaps, the uhs, the ums, the likes. You want to avoid a lot of that, and practice comes with that. As far as, sorry, can you get me into the last part of the question? Because I've now lost my train of thought.
Of course. Yeah, sorry. I was also thinking maybe it'd be a good idea to mention researching the schools that you're going to have interviews with. What are your thoughts on
Well,
that?
I know a lot of interviewers are asking, do you have any questions for us? And this is always very telling during the interview process of what kind of research you've done. If you're asking them questions that are easily answered by reading through their website, this is not a good sign for the head of school. They'll realize that you haven't really done any kind of research or, so what kind of curriculum do you use would be an obvious question.
Mhm.
What kind of curriculum? It's going to be on the website. We're an IB school, or we're a British curriculum, we're an American curriculum school, that kind of thing. But also it's you don't want to put the head of school on the hot seat. You don't want to touch controversial topics. I've heard some colleagues go in very hot and say, well, I was reading internationalschoolsreview.com and your reviews are awful. Can you speak to that? And it's like, oh my goodness,
Oh
why would you
no.
ask the head of school something? So there are
Oh no.
definitely do's and don'ts when it comes to that particular part of the interview where you want to seem researched, that you've done the research. And I would say one of the great easy questions, a nice lob to the head of school is, could you speak to the school culture? Could you speak to,
Hmm.
the retention of staff and how important is that to your school? Because then they can talk about all the great things that their school has, and it gives them an opportunity to highlight why staff stay. Why do they have low turnover? And, you don't want to get into the benefits. You don't want to talk about, is my PD going to be covered? Or you might be able to get away with something like, could you speak to some of the professional development opportunities that might be available to a newly arrived teacher at your school? Something generic like that rather than something very specific in benefits.
Okay. So my other parts of the question were whether you had any specific suggestions for singles versus couples. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. And then how you would handle interview
Okay, thank
follow-ups.
you. So the single and couple, it's quite possible the head of school will want to interview the couple together. When it's an in-person interview, and something to kind of warn your listeners, it will often be in the head of school's hotel room. So There is a bed
Right.
in that
Yeah.
room. And I just want to warn your listeners, this is completely normal. Unfortunately, it's just the way it is because they don't have office spaces for everyone. So you're walking down a hotel hallway, there's a couple chairs sitting outside a room, and there are other candidates waiting, and that's you might knock on the door. If you're 5 minutes to 2 minutes before your interview, you might knock on the door and just kind of give them a warning you're there. If there's already a candidate sitting there, just sort of compare times. Anyhow, when you get into that room, just know that there is a bed in that room, and it is a little awkward, but they almost always have chairs, extra chairs, so you can sit on a chair. You don't need to sit on the bed. The head of school hopefully is not sitting on the
Can you
bed.
imagine?
Like the bed is just sort of there in the room, but the elephant in the room, no one's talking about it. No one's looking at it. Hopefully it's made.
Yeah.
you know and then you're sort of in that section where the desk is. They often have their computer open, and they're sitting by the desk, and then you're sitting like by the coffee table or by a lamp or something. So you might do the interview together as a couple, teaching couple, and as I say, hopefully they have enough chairs for you. But they might also ask you to step out at a certain point during the interview and say, okay, do you mind just giving me a second with your husband or with your wife so I can ask them some particular questions about their specialty. That's what I've seen in the past. I have not been part of a teaching couple, so I couldn't speak to that too much. But as a single, yes, you go into the room and, do your interview as best you can being in a hotel room.
Awesome. And then what about follow-up?
So then I'm maybe old school, but I think old school is sometimes also etiquette, the way of etiquette. I always thank the head of school. I would say within 24 hours after the interview, sending a personal email to the head of school, thanking them for their time, thanking them for the interview, and maybe if you can just sort of jogging their memory about you as a candidate. I really appreciated hearing the story about blank. So this is why taking notes after the interview are super important. When you get into that hallway afterwards or in the elevator afterwards, jot down any notes from the interview that you can remember so that you can bring that up in the thank you note. And that will bring you to life as a candidate because they might be meeting upwards of 50 to 100 people. And how are you going to stand out? It's by little things like this, the little touches of making yourself be a person and not just a candidate number on a portfolio.
Thank you. Yeah, very helpful tips.
And speaking of notes, that brings back many years ago that when we would write the physical note and go put it in their little cubby or slide it under their door back in the good old days. So, Jacqueline, what you just shared there, that is such incredible information. It's just bringing back memories for me of going through the face-to-face interviews and all that's happening with them. And that's so helpful to let folks new to international recruitment know what it's going to be like that first time when they walk into that hotel room and have that interview. So thank you for that. So jumping a little bit back to the virtual interview, I'm just very curious about that. So how does that set up? How is it different? How is it the same? Can you share about that?
I don't want to seem like an expert on virtual job fairs simply because I've only been to a couple of them, two, in fact, and of two different recruitment agencies. One was maybe better than the other without mentioning names, but they were very similar in that you register for the virtual fair, you express interest in attending. They send you the portal through an email or through your login portal. You can click on entering into the virtual fair at that time, and then you make requests. You look at the job postings, and there's usually just something very easy to click on near the job posting, expressing interest to apply or interested in interviewing for this position. And then it's a waiting game of seeing if the head of school or the HR is going to reach out back to you and say, yes, we're interested in interviewing you. And sometimes you click on that and it's crickets. You get nothing and you think, is this working? Is this on? And then other times, you will get confirmed by somebody, hopefully in that virtual fair. And then you realize, okay, yes, it is working. And, 6 out of 7 of them are crickets. So that's why I've heard also from colleagues and staff, fellow friends around the world, that virtual fairs can feel rather frustrating because you don't have that almost direct access to the head of school. That face-to-face in that ballroom, the hotel ballroom is huge for knowing yes or no if I'm going to get an interview, because you're right there in front of them and they're saying, I've got any number of candidates for that particular position, and I think we're capped for that position interviews. And then you know where you stand with that school. Whereas when you do it virtually, it's a shot in the dark. You're hoping that you're going to hear back from them, but you might not. And so then you're just sort of waiting around at your computer. Then the interview process is very similar to what we've experienced with online learning. It's either a Zoom or a Skype conversation, usually with the video on. So that's something that, folks out there should know, is always dress like you're at an interview in person. So, they won't necessarily see you're wearing shorts or boxers on the bottom. But if you ever need to stand up and go somewhere on the interview, just know that might show. So, but definitely, suits, ties, lovely blouses, jackets, that kind of thing. You want to be very, very professional, and you want to check your background as well. Make sure that your background is not distracting and very professional and muted, I would say. Maybe not a white wall. It would be a little bit like a mugshot. Then you want to have some decor in the background that kind of draws your eye, but not something too distracting.
And not an unmade bed.
Definitely. And try and have, if you're living with others, living with animals, you put them out of the room. You have isolated yourself in a situation where you're not going to be interrupted during that, say, half hour to 45 minutes.
Yeah, I really appreciate all the, the little details you're giving us about the virtual fairs, because I have not ever attended one. I think it's important to point out one reason that someone might choose it is it's pretty expensive. I know you were talking about, $30 to register for a fair, but you have to take time off from your school. You may or may not get paid recruiting time. You have to fly there. You have to pay for the hotel. So there are other expenses related to it. And so that might be one reason why some people might choose a virtual fair. So I think it's important to bring that up too.
Yeah, I was always curious to hear people say recruitment fairs are super expensive, but I suppose it's because I've prepared ahead of time. When I know I'm going to an in-person fair, I've prepared ahead of time by booking a hotel nearby, but not necessarily the hotel that's hosting the fair, simply because it's often a 5-star hotel that's very expensive, even though they might try and tout that their hotel rooms are on discount for candidates and heads of school alike. I still find booking.com or hotels.com or tripadvisor.com, those websites you go to, and then you find a hotel that's just down a block or 2 blocks walk from the venue. I know some candidates will say, well, it's just easier because I can rest and relax in between interviews. Well, 1 block, 2 blocks, you can still rest and relax depending on your schedule and save a lot of money. And the same when it comes to airfare. You're not booking it at the last minute, but you're taking, ahead of time you're going to go to a particular job fair, then you're looking a few months in advance for that flight. So I suppose, yes, virtual is definitely free. It's definitely the least expensive option. But I also think that when we're talking about getting the job you want at the school you want, what is a few $1,000s to guarantee that by going to an in-person job fair? I think it's a drop in the bucket compared to your happiness for 2, maybe 3, maybe 8 years.
Yeah, that's a really fair point. So now you've had your interviews, and from what I hear from people who recently have been recruiting, you may get offers from multiple schools. How do you handle those job offers? How do you compare and contrast them? What criteria would you have people consider?
Yeah, hopefully going into the job fair, you've already considered what are your must-haves and what are your would-like-to-haves when it comes to the particular position and the particular school and country that you're looking for. What are some must-haves? Could be outside of school safety. So we're talking, it could be air pollution, safety for crime, walking on the street at night, in the daytime, do I feel safe? could be safety as far as safety of food. Can I trust what I'm going to be eating, or is it going to be all things injected with weird chemicals? Is it safe for my family if you're traveling with a family? So, that would be, I would think, one of the number one considerations. And when you're getting these offers from different schools, you're looking at comparing all the schools and the countries with your must-have list. Another must-have might be the particular position. Are you willing to accept something that you're not an expert at? If you're an ELA teacher, a secondary ELA teacher, will you accept that you're going to be teaching also a dance class or something completely out of your wheelhouse if that's the particular job offer that's been given to you? So the must-haves, I would recommend having that list firmly in hand before going to the job fair so that you have an idea of what is non-negotiable. And then the would like to haves, obviously, I think savings goes into the would like to have. It might be in the must-haves for some people, but what kind of savings will I be able to have by taking job A versus job B? What kind of quality of life? What would my weekends look like? What would my holidays look like? I mean, some teachers actually go into these positions saying, this is a hub. This is a travel hub. I'm going to be able to visit any number of countries from this particular country. So this would be great for my vacations. And other countries are very isolated, very difficult to leave, very difficult to travel from. And so that might be a consideration for the would like to have list. So I would say going into multiple job offers, you're going to go back to that list and be able to compare, make pros and cons. I'm a big list maker. So I like pros and cons of accepting this job and pros and cons of accepting this job and bringing it down to what are the benefits? What does the benefit package look like? What is my life going to look like day in and day out, Monday to Friday? And then what are my weekends going to look like? And a lot of times, a great way to find out is to ask when you've been offered. So when you've been actually given the firm job offer, to ask for an email address or a contact from someone at the school so you can ask them about their quality of life or what do they do on weekends. And if it's somebody from your department, even better, because they can speak to specifically your role at that school. So I don't think that is an unreasonable request for the head of school or the HR department to put you in contact with somebody from their school.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a great suggestion.
Let me ask a question about the veterans who've got 20 years experience and 2 master's degrees, and they're coming in. I guess it started several years ago that they start you at a much lower step, and that kind of became accepted throughout the world. And can you speak to that?
Yeah, in fact, I've seen that firsthand where, as I was increasing in years and education, my salary was capped. My entrance salary level was capped and then just grew from there with the years of experience at that particular school. I've seen that. And then I've also seen schools that have had no caps and no limits. And those schools are much better prepared to hire veterans. Veterans are way more likely to apply at those schools. And they happily pay for those veteran teachers to be on staff and use their experience to lead the school, maybe revamp their curriculum, or maybe they have an accreditation that year or in the next couple of years, and they want those veteran teachers to take the lead on their accreditation committees. So I've seen where teachers that have retired in their home country have gone abroad and earning some incredible salaries for their coffers, just to save a little bit more money for their actual retirement down the road. And but as you say, there are some times where it's capped. A 20-year veteran with a few degrees might come in at a level that is comparable to somebody with 1 master's and maybe 6 or 10 years experience, that they cap. And I think that's always something to ask about. If it comes down to the job offer, you want to find out, am I at my max, or is there a salary cap or an entry cap?
It's interesting you say that, because I think I only know of one time when we were hired at max or even close. Typically, and I think maybe this was what David was alluding to, we went from one school to another and you would go back to their hiring level. which was they would give you 5 years of experience, even if you had 20. And then you'd move to another school. You'd stay that school at 5 years, so you'd be up to the 10-year level. You'd go to a new school and you'd be at 3 years, depending what they offered in their starting package for people. So that has been something that we've always just kind of accepted was the situation. Are you seeing that that's no longer really a factor and people are actually hiring you with the amount of years of experience that you've earned?
No, I would say that the opposite, that the getting a school that hires you with 25, 30 years experience and paying you for that is the golden goose. And if you find that, that's incredible and it's very rare. But I have taught at a school that did that, and the number of veteran teachers they were able to hire was incredible. What a rich source of knowledge in the staff to be able to offer that. But it was definitely a rarity.
Mm-hmm.
Continuing on the finances, we had Dr. Stephen Bush on. He works with Thai Tax and does financial services for international educators all around the world. And he brought up the really huge point of the differences that you can find in health insurance. And just the other day, I'm still a member of one of the recruiting agencies. I was going through several schools to find a big variety in their level of coverage. And I know you wrote a blog post, one of your tips about this. So could you give just a brief run through of kind of the range that one might see with health insurance as part of the package?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had the luck of the draw of working at schools where they have offered full world coverage anywhere in the world, including the United States, which we can understand would be very expensive to cover if you happen to have a medical emergency there, with dental, with glasses, right down to sort of an average offer might be world coverage without dental, without glasses, and without United States covered. So for any American teachers or for anyone planning on visiting the States, they would have to get their own coverage for that particular summer or vacation. And then I've seen also, or I've been at schools where it's been local coverage only. And now that local coverage can be still privatized. And so you're a little bit better than the average Joe on the street because you've got that private coverage that will cover. But oftentimes that comes with the hassle of reimbursement claims, filling out paperwork, then paying for it in advance and then getting reimbursed either through a check or through a direct deposit in your account. And then in some particular countries, in some particular schools, it might just be the local medical care. So that is definitely something you want to consider on your must-haves or on your would like to haves list. How important is medical care in your particular situation? I know some families might have children with specific medical needs, insulin pumps that need to be covered or medication that needs to be covered. And so that's something that you definitely want to look into. The head of school might not be the best person to talk to. You could ask them, but then they might actually lead you to the head of HR, whose particular specialty might be about what the care package is.
That's that is so helpful for folks to kind of understand that the range is there. And then, like you're saying, find the person who can really give you the information that's going to help you through that process of deciding which school you're going to take. So a lot of information, a person's going through this recruitment process. They've been given the offers, they're recording information. What are some tools that you would advise folks to use? Maybe it's just as simple as a spreadsheet to document, to know where you stand in the process.
Yeah, in the past, when I've been recruiting myself, I've always had 2 spreadsheets. So the one spreadsheet is to track all the applications, where I've applied, so what school, what country, what particular position it was, where did I hear about it, and any other information, the website address, or that would also be a place where I would put the date of the interview, any details that I want to kind of recall about the interview. So that's in one spreadsheet for tracking my applications. And year to year, or as the case may be, if it was every couple of years, I would just open a new tab. I would always keep that spreadsheet and just open a new tab for that particular year, so that I could go back easily and see, wow, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I applied for this same job at this same school. And that's very telling. Okay, so that person or maybe that particular role is being replaced every few years. That could be something. The other spreadsheet I would recommend, or that I've used in the past, is a comparison. Being able to compare job offers, being able to compare schools is really important. That must-have list, and having that maybe would like to have list of qualities in a job offer in a school and in a country. So being able to compare that quickly, I would recommend starting a spreadsheet with the school going down sort of the left-hand side, and then the top categories are, what's the salary, what's the benefit package, because some schools will pay for rent, some schools will not, some schools will offer a stipend, so anything up to a particular amount for housing, and others will say, you find the house, we'll pay up to this amount, utilities included or not, flights included or not, PD. So there's any number of categories you can compare each school's offer, and that's where I create that second spreadsheet to be able to compare, as I say, apples to apples, and be able to see it on black and white. It helps you make a decision.
And also, I'll just point out that a lot of that information can be gleaned from the recruiting agency database. They have a lot of that information on there. And of course, the websites of the individual schools can give you some of that information too.
Exactly.
So thank you so much for coming on again. And once again, you just have such a wealth of valuable information as people are hitting the recruiting trail. Could you please remind us, and David alluded to your blog post that you have on comparing the packages, wondering if you can please just remind everybody where they can reach out and contact you and where they can get more information about you.
Yeah, so I'm an international teacher consultant that works for individual teachers around the world who want that extra help with their CV, with their cover letter, interview preparation, video calls, emails, answers. Basically, I'm your secret weapon in your corner, working directly with you, with my wealth of knowledge and with my network. I am not a recruiter. I don't go out looking for jobs for you, but if I happen to come across a job posting that's perfect for you, I will send it to you in an email. And so I have a website called www.jpmintconsulting.com. There's no spaces. JPMint. So my initials, JPM, and then int for international, consulting.com. And on that website, you will see the kind of services I offer, as well as I'm up to 12 blog articles and 17 tips on job searching for an international teaching post. And every week I try and post something new to the website, either through a blog or through the tips. And you can subscribe to my website for free and get that information directly to your inbox so you don't miss anything.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yes, and I'll jump in there too, just to say, once again, you've hit it out of the ballpark with so much valuable information, and you're helping me remember all the nuances of the process of recruiting, plus the new things that are coming in. And I go to your website often and find what your latest tips are. So, Jacqueline, thanks again for coming on the Educators Going Global podcast with us.
Well, I'm really excited about this opportunity to reach a wider audience, and I'm very happy. As you might be able to tell, I'm very happy to offer a lot of this information for free, simply because I wish I had access to this when I was out in the market. And I know it can be a scary place. You feel isolated, you feel alone. And it would have been great to have someone like myself to shoot ideas off of, to get a second set of eyes to look at, this cover letter. Do you think have I got a chance to get this position? What do you think of this school? What do you think of this country? I wish I had that resource. And so I'm happy to be that resource for everyone now at this time.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I want to thank you for having me on. And it's always a pleasure to walk down memory lane with you, thinking about my time overseas. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today on Educators Going Global.
You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all the other usual suspects.
Please subscribe, like us, and leave a review on Apple and Spotify, and let your teaching friends know about us so we can grow our community.
Please reach out at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com And join our Facebook group, Educators Going Global, if you have ideas, comments, or wish to share a Going Global story of your own.
You can also find us on Instagram at Educators Going Global.
Please visit our website as well, www.educatorsgoingglobal.com. All our podcast episodes are on there by topic, along with blog posts, Going Global stories, and our ever-growing resource library. For now, this is Audrey
And David.
inviting you to travel,
Teach.
and connect with us.